in April 2017, and I'm talking to John Fanagan, former senior master, former head of the English department, who retired in 2008, but we'll get to that later on. But first of all, John, can you take us back to your very early years, in fact your first year, 1973, under Warden Argyll?
Yes, I didn't know anything about St. Columba's except I went to St. Mary's College in Rathmines, and occasionally I would see a rugby team up on the notice board, which I was not a member of, playing against St. Columba's, and I knew it was a school in the Dublin Mountains. And when I applied to work here, it was actually as much out of curiosity. I didn't expect to be offered a job, but I just thought I'd like to come up and see what the place was like. I was interviewed by Warden Argyll. He was in his last year as Warden Argyll. He was about to leave a year later. And he interviewed me in the room which is now the college dining room, which is the dining room here in Whitehall, was then his study. And rather to my surprise, he rang one of my referees, Professor Alan Bliss of UCD, that evening, and said he was very impressed, first of all because I wore a suit. And Alan Bliss gave him a glowing reference, obviously, so he offered me the job. And I was only to be here for a year because Colin Poldham, who was my predecessor as head of English, had been employed by the warden, but was working in India and couldn't come for a year. So I was a stopgap, and Christopher Fettis was acting head of English. So perhaps unusually for a new teacher, I was 23 years of age, I was teaching all forms from sixth form down, and I was only 5 years older than the people in sixth form. Normally a new teacher wouldn't have that privilege. And there were two things I remember. I was living over in the Girdham, which was Stackallan House then. Stackallan House lived there. Norman Lush was the housemaster. I lived there in just one room. And first of all, I'd never worked so hard in my life. When I was given my timetable, it was 30 periods a week, I thought it was a joke. Just lesson after lesson after lesson. I'd been writing a diary at that time, a little silly 5-year diary thing. And it stopped almost as soon as I started working here because I was working so hard, I was completely knackered at the end of the day. Warden Argyll's reign had been a long one. He had come in 1949, the year before I was born. So he was very much a kind of, obviously a very established figure, an impressive looking, tall, white-haired man with a wife who was known as the Rabbit. And in those days, there was no self-service. The whole college sat down to eat each meal. And at lunchtime, members of staff and prefects sat at the head of each table, and you were on the same table for the whole year. And because I was house tutor of Stackallan, I sat at the head of a Stackallan table. And a trolley trundled up and down the dining hall, and you were served pretty ghastly food. In the mornings, at breakfast time, the senior prefect would get a large spoon and bang it on the high table before he would say grace. And if you weren't in, the door was locked, and if you weren't in by that time, you were marked late. It was pretty awful and very old-fashioned. The other thing that was extraordinary was girls had started to come. There were about 10 girls when I arrived in 1973. They didn't wear gowns. They didn't have anything that could be classed as a uniform, unlike the boys. It was as if they were kind of in some sort of glorified Airbnb. They were staying there and attended classes. And they put together a kind of a hockey team, you know. Wagons Hockey, I remember. Terrific article in the old Columban, back number of the Columban. But the amazing thing was in the common room, there were only 17 full members of staff. I know because I was number 17. You You went by your number. The warden was number 1, I was number 17. And there was only one woman, Gay Caird. She was the wife of the housemaster of Grange, David Caird, and she was in charge of the girls. And she crept, and I'm not exaggerating, into common room for convention. She sat there and scuttled out just as soon as it ended, not even staying for a cup of tea. Women were not allowed in the common room. Gay Caird was allowed in just on official business, and then had to depart. Incredible. I can't believe that I'm alive. It's like talking about civil rights in America, discrimination against Negroes. Anyway, I loved it. I just loved the place. It was like all those Billy Bunter stories and, Tom Merry and all those sort of people. And I hadn't got a car. I had to get the 47 bus down at the corner near Taylor's if I wanted to go into town, like everyone. The great excuse those days, if a boy, it was nearly all boys, wanted to go into town, was to buy a nib. For a dip bed, I suppose. Anyway, that was the great excuse. It didn't cost very much and it allowed you to go into town. And anyway, as soon as I was here a week and I knew this is what I want to do. But of course I was only here for a year. So coming towards the end of the year, Warden Argyll, who had announced his retirement at the beginning of that school year, said to me, look, we have this new man, David Gibbs, coming. I can't bind my successor, but if you want to stay on for another year to do your diploma, higher diploma in education, because I hadn't got one, didn't expect to be a teacher, then he might employ you if there's a job going. But this man Poulton is coming, and so I said, yeah, I'd love that. And I applied for my diploma in Trinity College, and I had quite a full timetable. Like, went into Trinity every day. I think it was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday in the afternoon. But I had a pretty full timetable in the mornings, more than a dip ed student would normally have. And I also, because one of the conditions of David Gibbs's employment was that he must pass the HDIP ed exam within a year of his appointment, because it would be a huge saving of his salary to the college. He and I travelled in every afternoon to Trinity together. So it was actually a very good way of getting to know the new warden. And you know, it was a bit of fun. I mean, the dip ed is now 2 years, and it's, I think, even less relevant to life in the classroom than it was then. But anyway, that was my first 2 years in the college. Other things may occur to me about how it was different, but as I said before, even though David Gibbs immediately, he made a point of employing a dip ed student who was a woman, so that there would be a woman in the common room. He correctly thought it was ridiculous that women weren't allowed there, and there just weren't enough any women on the staff. And her name was Faith Brandon. She was very loud, so she made up for the absence of women all those years. She certainly filled the common room. She was very nice. Her father was an old Columban.
John, as you said then, after apparently being a stopgap for a year, it turned out that you were going to stay a lot longer, and straight away that new Warden David Gibbs, arrived in 1974. He was a new broom. And what was his initial impact on the college?
Well, he had taught for a number of years. He'd been rector of St. Paul's School in Darjeeling in India. And one of my colleagues, still alive, so I won't name him, said, he treats us like a lot of coolies. And that was actually a bit of the attitude, because the place was really run down. I remember over in fourth form boys doing prep. I remember going over in a room that was called Wade Dunraven. And you'd go in there, I remember walking in, there was someone sitting on an old car seat in the middle of the floor. Somebody else was cooking something on a Primus stove. This was during prep. And one of the first things David Gibbs did, he issued an ordinance, that room is to be tidied. And when it didn't happen the first night, I was in the telephone box in Whitehall, and I remember seeing boy after boy coming out into Whitehall, into his study to be beaten. All the occupants of that room were beaten by David Gibbs because they had disobeyed his ordinance. He micromanaged everything, and the place had been so free and easy, far too free and easy before that it was deeply resented. There was a new sub-warden, and there was quite clearly tension between them. But I was kind of torn between thinking this autocrat had come in and was just behaving like a dictator, and then realising on my daily journeys into Trinity with him what an intelligent and entertaining and really very fine man he was. So I would say my attitude towards him was ambivalent, but certainly the tensions he created were great, and there was one very long-serving member of staff who was gone within 4 terms. They just could not coexist. That was Joe Gruco. You can edit that out if you like. He was the longest-serving member of staff. He was precentor, but he also taught in Trinity. And David Gibbs, who was a fine musician himself, wanted a full-time musical director, precentor. And so it was kind of unprecedented. I remember Joe Gruco's farewell party had to be held down in Norman Lush's house because the warden was not going to be present and he wasn't going to be invited. That sort of thing you cannot imagine happening now. But it's interesting that for David Gibbs, I remember somebody remarking, I think he was the single, I worked under 4 wardens, and I know a 5th one here now, Mark Bubayer. He was the man who transformed the college. He's the man who made the college what it is today. First of all, fully coeducational. And secondly, he had the chapel altered so that it would accommodate 300 pupils. The number of pupils had just passed 200, including these new girls, in my first year. And I remember Warden Argyll at his last St. Columba's Day celebrating the fact that for the first time in its history, the numbers had passed 200. David Gibbs was to raise that by 50% up to 300. In fact, it reached 321 year, and you could feel it was a little bit crowded. I mean, chapel, dining hall, and so on. But he, as I say, he micromanaged. No detail was too trivial for him to deal with. He obviously with the increase in the number of pupils, with co-education beginning from the top down, as it were. They were in 5th and 6th form when he was here, maybe just 6th, and then he took girls at 4th form, 3rd form, and so on, all the way down. And he, as I say, created the template of the modern, the 20th century St. Columba's College that wardens Macy and Hazlitt and Bubayer have carried on.
So John, after a few years then obviously no longer a new member of staff, but you're very familiar with the school and its distinctive qualities, and what do you think were those qualities that made you want to stay and make a career out of working here?
I know that people, when they come in here first, are astounded by the beauty of its surroundings, which of course was part of what our founder Sewell wanted. He wanted pupils to be in beautiful surroundings, surrounded by beautiful things. Even in this drawing room, you can see an example of the grace and elegance that the college lives in. But it's interesting that for me, I go back to David Gibbs for a moment. Under his wardenship, almost nothing of any consequence was built. The Todd building where I taught, nothing very striking. But for me, the important thing, and I'm getting to your question now, is not the physical fabric of the college or the beauty of its environment, but the almost unique relationship, I think, that exists between pupils and staff and among the pupils themselves. That is the single thing that has not changed. It may not be unique, but it is certainly, for me, the most important aspect of this college. And the other things, the huge changes in the facilities and in the fabric, the library, the sports hall, the new Grange building and the much improved dormitory and staff accommodation. All of those things are very important, but they are not as important as the relationships and the closeness that exists within the place. And I would include, which is one reason I was so lucky, the relationships among the staff, the friendships I made, the fun in the common room. That is the most important thing, and that hasn't changed as far as I can see. And I found it even when I went last Christmas I was asked to join the choir on a tour of singing concerts in Amsterdam. I didn't know any of the children, any of the pupils, but I could see the easiness and the way that I was made welcome, that important aspect of our life still exists.
And of course, John, the most important element of relationships between staff and pupils, the most important places in the classroom, and we should get on to what you did primarily here, though you had many roles, an English teacher. And I'd like you now to talk about what you think is most important in your work as an English teacher, as your work as head of department. What's distinctive about English at this place?
One thing I think that is unique to English teaching in this college, and it's something that was established sometime after I came here. I can't remember exactly when. One of the things that I fought for a long time was to have on the timetable all English classes set together. Formerly, the people that you had in your English class might depend on the group they were in. So if they weren't doing physics and were doing geography, or this is the way the timetable was structured. I think it must have been during perhaps Tim Macy's time that finally I got what was having English classes all took place at the same time. That meant you could have them of equal size. Again, other times, I remember having a class of 4 and somebody else, a colleague, maybe you might have had 15 in your class because of the other subjects they were doing. When we were able to timetable the English classes together, we were able to arrange the classes exactly as we liked. And the one thing I think may be unique to St. Columba's, I've never heard of another school that does it, is that we have no streaming in English classes. In other words, right up to 6th form, we have no, as it were, pass set. Everybody is equal. The sets are equal. And it's certainly my experience I know it wouldn't work in other subjects, like mathematics, for example. But in our English classes, they're small. We're very lucky. Average size 15 or 16. I suppose it's still the same. Everyone can make a contribution. Even the least literate, the most challenged in terms of dyslexia or any of those difficulties, can make a contribution to the class and will be brought up by the more able people in the class rather than being, as it were, dragging the others down. And I think it has been, it's something that I was always, if I could say, proud of, was that we were able to do this. I know we were very privileged, very lucky in having small classes. Maybe in a bigger school with bigger classes, you would have to have a set where, where just the weakest people were. But I thought it was great that we could all work together. And the other thing is, I think it's something that we really share as an English department. I know teaching with you and Liam, who are former pupils of mine, that we're very, very different in our teaching styles. But there's one thing that we share, and that is a belief in the importance of what we do. And if we believe, as we do, that Shakespeare is important, our pupils will believe it too. And we're not telling them a lie. Shakespeare is important, at least as important as geometry or whatever they do in bloody mathematics.
And we move now outside the classroom. You mentioned earlier how important many activities are in the school outside standard teaching. What did you most enjoy and most appreciate outside the classroom in this school?
Well, I have to say Shakespeare, simply because if you want to know what great literature is, teach it. Because you'll soon, and if you teach it again and again, you will soon realise what's good and what isn't. And Shakespeare always works. Well, I'm thinking particularly of the tragedies. That it's never boring, because if you teach Macbeth or Hamlet to one class, when you're teaching it 2 or 3 years later to another group, it can be like a different play because of the different ways in which they're reacting. You will know that we both love the novels of Henry James, particularly The Portrait of a Lady, which unfortunately, in the dumbing down of the curriculum that is part of what things are like nowadays, that would be now considered way off limits for a leaving cert novel. It would be considered too complex, too difficult, and it is complex and difficult. But one of the high points of my teaching career, and it was maybe, I don't know, the early 90s, during the 90s, when you found remaindered in Hodges Figures or something like that, lovely everyman editions of The Portrait of a Lady. You found about 40 of them or something, and you bought them for £2 each, as it would have been at the time, or €2 each. And we had a couple of evenings a week over in the Barton Room. We had what we called Evening English, where a group of fifth formers, I remember a couple of them. I remember Niamh Denham sitting there saying, "Oh, it's so sad." And I remember somebody else coming in with a placard one day saying, "We want Caspar." This was Caspar Goodwood, one of Isabel's suitors. It was fantastic. And the sad thing is, in a way, I don't think we could do it now. We wouldn't have the time. We got too busy when you became subordinate. I was head of English and doing a senior master and doing other things. But even the pupils, I don't think, would have the time to spend, a couple of hours, 2 evenings a week for 3 or 4 weeks, doing something really challenging. And it was one of the best experiences of my teaching career, was doing that. It wasn't on any course, but there's, 15 pupils, volunteers coming along, 2 nights a week. I hope they remember it as fondly as I do. Outside the classroom, in my very first convention in the common room in September 1973, the new subwarden read the minutes of the previous convention, which is before I came, and it was the last convention of the then subwarden G.K. White, known to many old Columbans, historian of the college and so on. And as part of the minutes, as I sat there at my first convention, Norman Lush read out, that Mr. White said that it was important to remember that the chapel was the centre of school life, and I, maybe not physically, but mentally threw my eyes up and said, what a load of tosh. But by the end of my time, actually not by the end, but fairly soon into my teaching career here, I realised he was right and is right, and it still is the centre of school life. And it's nothing to do with a feeling of, a particularly spiritual or religious feeling, though that can help. Because of its collegiate style, where the congregation, they face each other, creates a very strong sense of community. The singing is terrific. It's a very orderly and quiet start to every day. It's what people now are paying a lot of money to do mindfulness courses for. It's mindfulness. Way before mindfulness was invented or classified. And it's the one place, the main place, old Columbans want to go and see when they come back to the college. And it's a very vibrant, living place. And I think David Gibbs's, maybe it was controversial at the time, decision to build the gallery so that the 300 pupils could be housed at the one time was very important. And at a recent service in chapel, one of the fellows turned to me and said, how could we get another 100 people in here? And I hope that that isn't a reflection of how the fellows are thinking. Of course, economies and profits and all the rest of it will go up if there are 400 pupils here. But the whole college will change. And if you can't cater properly, the chapel is very important because it's the one time when the whole school is together. In a very beautiful building, and even if you're not at all religious, you can sing or you can just sit quiet and just be mindful. So there are more important things than maybe just, running the college like a business. It's not a business. Apart from the chapel, the extracurricular activities that I was involved in, I really enjoyed. There was basketball, first of all, and then for the 35 years that we're here, every summer I took the second 11 cricket team. And it was a bit like, if I may say it, Shakespeare. People believed because I believed the second 11 was important, which of course, in the great scheme of things, it isn't. At least people have heard of Shakespeare. People wanted to play on it. And I know Norman Lush said once in a moment of exasperation, there are only 2 sacred cows in this college, the choir and the second 11. Because David Milne really, he was a brilliant music teacher, and the choir was important, and he really believed in it. But I also, as you know, I produced plays from, almost my first term here, and always enjoyed doing that. I remember I used to maybe take some parents aback when I said the one disadvantage of co-education, and I'm really in favour of it, is that boys don't get the chance to play girls' parts in plays. As I said, it's great fun and they love it. But the way of getting to know pupils in a different context, taking a team, producing a play, is very important. And you can see strengths and weaknesses, and see much more about the people that you're dealing with when you're seeing them in the context outside the classroom.
Thank you. We're coming towards the end of our talk now, and as we said,
Only getting going.
This is part one. You retired in 2008, which is almost 10 years ago now. However, you haven't gone very far. You live just down the road, and you're often at events here, and you've been involved in various ways in the school. With a little bit of perspective now, how do you see the college now as it approaches 2018, which is, of course, the 175th anniversary?
Yes, 175 years next year, and I know big celebrations are being planned. It's in a very healthy state. I like the new warden. I think he's got plenty of energy, and he's got a terrific deputy in yourself. I think that I'd like to see the college a little more outward looking. A lot of the fellows are old Columbans, which is great, but I think I think maybe there should be a little more emphasis on getting other people who are not old Columbans themselves, who would look at things with fresh eyes. Though the old Columban presence is very important because of how it can help to preserve the ethos of the college. It's very much, I know people used to see us up here as detached, and even though there are a lot of non-Irish pupils in the college now, I still see it very much as an Irish school, very much in the tradition, the Irish, a tradition which I'm not part of, but which I come to appreciate, of the Church of Ireland, perhaps a more liberal ethos, and certainly what surprises me and continues to please me is, even though the whole character of the pupil body and the staff body has changed so radically. When I came, it was all men, nearly all, I think I was the only Catholic on the staff. The pupils were nearly all boys, nearly all Irish, nearly all Protestants. Somehow, it's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the whole atmosphere. Somehow, this important ethos of the relationships within this community, which is, I think, central to its worth and its excellence, is preserved, and long may it continue to be so.
So, John Fanagan, former Senior Master, former Head of the English Department, former colleague of mine, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian.